Welcome to our weekly 3-minute therapy podcast with my co-host, Mick Ferry, REBT expert, and I'm Dr. Michael Edelstein, clinical psychologist, and I practice REBT. REBT is rational emotive behavior therapy, the type of therapy devised by Albert Ellis in the 1950s, which created a revolution in the psychotherapy movement from the old style Freudian psychoanalytic type therapy to the current day therapy, which is sometimes called cognitive behavior therapy. But the father of cognitive behavior therapy, or the grandfather, was REBT, rational emotive behavior therapy. Today, we're going to be discussing limitations of rational emotive behavior therapy. Uh, we, I spent a lot of time thinking hard to find the limitation, but I might have found one. The key principle of REBT is that our emotions come from our thinking about situations, not from situations themselves. I call that the first principle of therapy. And the type of thinking that causes disturbance are thinking in terms of demands. Must, should, supposed to's, have to's. Because I prefer to do well and get your approval, I absolutely must, or else I'm no good. Because I prefer you to treat me well. If you don't, you're no good. And I prefer my life to be fair, easy, and hassle free. And if it's not, then my life is horrible. So if you have emotional disturbance, anxiety, depression, anger, or procrastination or addictions, look for the must, look for the should, question, challenge, and uproot your musts and shoulds. Get over your demands and reinforce your preferences. Mick?
I was going to say the grandfather of cognitive therapy is actually not rational motive therapy, but rational therapy, as Albert Ellis originally called it. Tell me if you think I'm wrong. And then it became rational emotive therapy, and that, which is what it was called when I first started practicing. And then he added the rational emotive behavior therapy. So to be technically precise, rational therapy was what it was called when Albert Ellis founded it, and that became the bedrock and the foundation for cognitive therapy.
Yeah, I agree with that. What I was saying was Albert Ellis was the grandfather, not
Yeah,
not not REBT was the grandfather.
but you did say REBT, and to be precise, it was originally called rational therapy.
Yeah, I agree with that. RT, rational therapy.
Yeah. All
Okay,
right.
so yeah, so today we're going to be discussing any limitations of REBT, and I just could find one, which I don't know if you could call a limitation of REBT, and that is it doesn't work for all clients. For example, it doesn't work, at least in my experience, with young children, or it doesn't work, in my experience, with some people who are diagnosed with schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. Although I have had some limited success with a few schizophrenic clients, teaching them that they don't need approval. I once had a client who claimed that the KGB was following him. And it turned out that um, trying to convince him the KGB wasn't following him didn't work. And he told me that wasn't going to work because he saw Albert Ellis, and Albert Ellis was trying to convince him of that. But what was underneath that was his need for approval. And he thought people were disapproving of him. And then he inflated that into these paranoid fantasies. So that did help with him to some extent. It helped to keep him out of a mental hospital where he had been hospitalized on a regular basis. So I think it had some limited help with him. And with children, if they're not too young, you could teach REBT on a watered down level. Like it's not the end of the world if you screwed up, or you're not a bad person. You're just an imperfect human. So some of those things on a simple level could be taught in some areas. Mick?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, let's be more specific about if they're not too young. What is not too young? I teach a lot of kids drumming, and I use REBT ideas when I teach them, not because I'm trying to teach them REBT ideas, but because I'm trying to teach them drumming, but I'll tell them if you stay relaxed and if you tell yourself that you're probably going to get this rather than saying you have to be able to play this right now, but you can wait and practice, and then you don't have to be able to play it right now, then you'll do much better. But I'll say this with people who are 6 years old and they'll understand it. Six year olds can understand such a thing. I would say underneath that, I have taught 4 and 5 year olds, and I would say under the age of 6 is where I find that I can't really use REBT ideas or just rational ideas. But once a child reaches the age of 6, they generally understand things such as you don't need to play this right now. Stay relaxed, practice it, and you'll most likely be able to play it.
Yeah, I agree that it depends on what you said, what's too young, and to some extent it depends on the child. Some children are brighter than others, and REBT consists of abstract thinking, thinking about your thinking, and younger children uh, are not capable of that. But as you're pointing out, Mick, some younger children are, and some aren't. So it means adapting it to the person you're working with and seeing what their level of abstract thinking is, and then trying to water down the message to meet where they're at. Mick?
I was going to say, just to be specific, I have found 6 to be about the cutoff. You can begin at 6. Underneath that, I haven't found I've been able to do it. So just to be specific, 6 is where I've found children begin to understand REBT ideas.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah.
I had something else I wanted to mention. You
Yeah.
said people are bipolar. Well, bipolar is a very popular phrase now. And one of the things to be careful of when saying some people do not benefit from REBT. I know so many people that claim that they are bipolar. And if I'd listened to the people that I notice, it's 25 to 30% of the population is claiming to be bipolar. And as I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, but as I remember discussing with you, this term bipolar is a very somewhat new term now, probably 10 or 15 years old. But a lot of people try to throw themselves into that category. And I think it's principally because they have trouble accepting themselves as a fallible human being who can screw themselves up. So that there may be people who are exactly or technically bipolar. Watch out for throwing yourself into that category, because I think REBT can help so many people who give up on it and don't apply it, because it takes continued application and it takes intelligent application.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say people are bipolar. That's defining the entire person. I would say some people have a diagnosis of bipolar, or some people have some bipolar symptoms, but it would be semantically imprecise to say people are bipolar. People are imperfect humans who act, think, and feel in a variety of ways. Mick?
Yeah, but if you're saying that it doesn't work with people who can be classified as bipolar, however you want to put it, I still think that's a somewhat slippery slope. How do you determine if someone has bipolar tendencies and cannot benefit from REBT?
Well, I think that you can, again, depending on the person and where they're at, you can use some version of REBT to help people who have manic episodes and depressed episodes, although it's much more difficult. And I found that if someone is in a manic state, then unless they're on some medication that stabilizes their mood, it's very hard for them to focus on a thought and focus on their thinking and change their thinking.
I would say this is a very small percentage of the population, though. And now I could be wrong. Tell me if you think I'm wrong, but I think that there is a danger here of people ruling out the usefulness of REBT because they could throw themselves into a category of people that it wouldn't help. I have some. Was there something you wanted to say about that?
No.
Okay. I do have some other limitations of REBT I would like to mention.
Oh, yeah, I had one too. So why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, REBT cannot change the human tendency to be irrational. It can reduce the frequency of it, but attempting to eliminate any tendency to be irrational is not within REBT's capability, and REBT would not claim to even try to do that. I've heard Albert Ellis himself say our goal is not to be 100% rational, but largely so. However, that being said, I have found REBT to be much more effective for me to attempt to be as rational as I can. And anytime I find myself being irrational, to then find the demand, get rid of the demand, talk myself out of the demand. And I spoke with Albert Ellis's widow, Debbie Jaffe Ellis, about this. And she said, well, why not attempt to be 100% rational? I said, well, okay, but Al said you're only going to achieve to be largely rational. And she said, yeah, but if you don't demand yourself to be 100% rational, but you continually attempt to, you probably will end up being much more rational much more of the time. And that's what I've found. And I've found that, as she put it, being mindful throughout the day whenever I'm being irrational to catch the demand and get rid of it. I don't always have to do the written ABC exercise. I can do it mentally, sometimes vocally while I'm driving. Anyway, did you want to say something?
No, you had another one?
Uh, well, oh yes. It's important to distinguish, as you and I have talked about, between practical problems and emotional problems. And REBT will not address a practical problem other than telling you try to be as smart as you can, get off your ass, and do what you can to correct the problem. But if I need a job, REBT would not advocate me feeling good about needing a job. It would advocate do what you can to find the job, because that's a problem that would best be solved for your own benefit.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. Did you have another one?
No, I'd say that's it, but that's been one of my biggest pitfalls, has been not identifying practical problems and thinking that REBT can solve a practical problem, when simply what REBT can do is eliminate my irrationalities and eliminate my anxiety, my procrastination about solving the problem. But I will do best to solve a practical problem by being as rational as I can. So REBT will aid me in that way, but it's my effort and my insight and my intelligence that will, and my incisive application of my intelligence, that will solve the practical problem.
Yeah, very good. And another limitation, not so much of REBT itself, but of research related to REBT, is there hasn't been much good research on REBT, and that's in terms of its effectiveness by using control groups. And that's something that could be looked into. Okay, Mick, anything else?
Yeah, I wanted to mention that sometimes people conclude, as this email that we got from the mutual friend of ours, sometimes people conclude that REBT doesn't work when actually it will work, but they are not applying it. And when it doesn't work, as you have pointed out, it's one of three reasons. One, the person is missing the demand. If you miss the demand, if I am anxious about getting married and I think that I'm anxious about my friends at the wedding, but I'm actually anxious about, oh God, I'm getting married and this marriage must work. And I confuse that with I'm getting married and I must perform well for my friends, or they're going to think badly of me. But actually, it's me thinking badly of myself. I must succeed at this marriage because if I don't, I'm no good, rather than worrying about what other people think of me. If you miss the should, REBT won't work. If you don't vigorously, passionately rip apart the irrational belief, I'm not a worm if the marriage doesn't work. If you do not passionately, rigorously rip apart the belief, REBT will not work. And be careful, because we are stubborn in our irrationalities. So it can take repeated application to have REBT be effective for you. And then third, there is a third or a secondary disturbance. I must not be anxious about getting married. And so if someone's finding it isn't working, these are not limitations of REBT, these are misapplications of it. One, missing the should. Two, not passionately ripping apart the demand. Three, having a secondary disturbance. So don't confuse REBT not working with it having limitations. Often it's that a person is not applying it correctly.
Yeah, exactly. And the big picture, as you're saying, Mick, is REBT is a great approach to therapy. It has limitations for the reasons we've given, but just keep working at it, practice it, and watch our podcast to learn more about it. Mick, how about a last word?
Well, as you and I have talked about, Al said the craziest thought you can have is, I must be rational. REBT recognizes that. So that is one limitation of REBT. As I think I've said, REBT cannot guarantee to make a person 100% rational with no possibility of slipping into irrationality. And that is not the goal of REBT. That is one of its limitations. And that's one of the principles, one of the main principles of being rational. Avoid the thought, I must be rational.
Yeah, and I wouldn't call that a limitation of REBT. I'd call that a limitation of applying REBT, but the theory itself holds.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Okay. So I'd like to wrap it up now. And thanks, Mick, for your great participation here. I'm Dr. Michael Edelstein, a clinical psychologist. You can get my website at 3minutetherapy.com. 3 is spelled out. Thanks, Chris Rossini, our technical engineer behind the scenes, holding it all together. Comment below if you have thoughts, questions, or if you'd like to volunteer to be a guest. Mick and I will cure you of every emotional disturbance under the sun. And subscribe to the 3-Minute Therapy podcast to do what, Mick?
To stay on the rational side of life.